this video, we're going to learn how to paint a room like a professional. There are three main stages to painting a room. The first stage is the ceiling, then the walls, and last the woodwork, meaning the doors and windows, and the trim. Andrew's going to take you through the first step, which is painting the ceiling.
A smooth and well-painted ceiling adds the finishing touch to any room. When painting an entire room, first paint the ceiling, next the walls, and lastly the woodwork and trim. These are the materials you'll need. Firstly, a drop cloth and plastic sheeting, paint stirrer, Moto pink to white ceiling paint, cutting in brush, paint tray, roller, extension pole, safety gear, safety glasses, cap to protect your hair, and old clothing or an overall, and rubber gloves. Paint your ceiling before you paint the walls, that way any splashes or splatters that land on the wall will still get painted over later. Prep your ceiling by washing and rinsing the surface to get rid of any grease. Scrape off any flaking paint, fill any cracks and sand smooth any lumps and bumps. It's a good idea to take off any fixtures and paint underneath. That way if you actually change your fitting at a later stage, you're not left with a big round circle of the different coloured paints. As with any new paint, always remember to give it a really good stir for around about 5 minutes. We're going to be using this Moto pink to white paint. Now this is really nice because it actually goes on pink, so you can see exactly where you're applying it onto your white ceiling, and as it dries it goes white. Perfect. Okay, we're going to start our cutting in now. Remember, when cutting in cornice, it's always best to use a brush, and the roller is just not going to be able to cover over the intricate edges and the sides. If you don't have a cornice, then always allow 100mm extra overlap so that when you do roller on, you make sure you cover over the cut-in area. Remember, if you are painting the entire room, we don't need to mask up the area, but if you're not going to be painting the walls, you might want to actually cover the walls up with plastic and mask it off. So that way you're not going to get any of the ceiling paint onto your walls. Again, don't panic about the pink ceiling. As it dries, it will turn white. Cut in the corners all the way around the ceiling, and don't worry about not covering everything because you're going to do a second coat. Okay, now we've got the easy part. We've got our paint on our roller, we've got our roller pole. You can stand back and just roller our ceiling. A thin coat will ensure there are no drips and runs. Work from one side to the other, walking backwards to avoid any splatters on the already painted surface. Allow at least 2 hours for the coats to dry before you put on a second coat. Depending on the colour of the ceiling beforehand, we'll decide whether or not you need a third.
If all this sounds overwhelming, or you just don't have the time and would like someone to come paint the room for you, just call 877-866-8001 and we will connect you to a top-rated professional painter in your area. Okay, the ceiling's finished. Now Andrew's going to show you how to paint your walls.
Painting a room in your house will give it a new look and feel, but there are a few things to keep in mind in order to achieve the best result. When painting interior rooms, you're going to need drop cloths, newspaper, block-it, and masking tape to protect your floor. You can also use masking film to protect the walls and also doors and windows. You're going to need a painter's tray, a roller, paint brushes, a painter's bucket, and also paint stirrers too to mix up the paint. You can use a paddle or you can use an electric one which connects to your drill. In addition, you will also need your undercoat and your final coat, and not to mention something to clean the tools with. For those hard to reach places, use a step ladder or an extender pole for your roller brush. Not to forget your safety equipment, gloves, overalls and safety goggles. Remember to prepare your walls as we showed you in the episode on preparing surfaces. Sugar soap the walls, fill in any cracks and rough surfaces, and also sand it down so it's nice and smooth. Then you can move on to the next step. To protect your floors, you're going to use a drop sheet or a drop cloth. But normally when it pushes right up against the wall, it gets in the way of the paintbrush. So what I like to do is actually just put down some newspaper and then some masking tape, so it allows it to seal right up against the wall, and then bring the drop cloth over on top of that. Once you've finished masking your floor, pull your drop cloth up. And now we're going to mask our fittings. Basically, you're going to get paint going everywhere when you're painting your room. So try and cover up as much of the stuff you don't want paint on. You can fill in the rest with some newspaper or just carry on with more tape. Finish off the rest of your fittings and then start on your doors, windows, corners, anything you don't want paint on. Now you'll see I've used Block It on the painted surfaces and masking tape on the cupboard's non-painted surfaces. The reason why is basically the Block It is a lot less adhesive, so it's not likely to pull your paint off when you remove the tape. Once you've finished masking up your wall, it's now time to mix your paint. We've got our undercoat here. Now as you can see, it's actually separated quite a bit. It's supposed to be white. So you can use a flat paddle to mix it up. Takes a while, you've got to mix it for about 5 minutes, or you can cheat and use one of these. These are much more fun. Just start it off slowly, otherwise it's going to spray paint everywhere. There you can see the paint mixing. Just continue for a good few minutes until it's completely all white and well mixed in. Once you've finished mixing your paint, you're now going to decant some into a painter's bucket. I'm just going to get rid of this, put that into a bucket of water, and wash it out just now. Any little mess like that, just give it a wipe up. The reason why is later on you'll find that all those drips end up going down over your instructions on the back of the can. It's quite awkward to read later on, trust me. When you're finished with the paint, make sure you put the lid back on. It just stops it from evaporating, drying out, and if you do bump it over, it's not going to make a big mess. An important step before you start painting a wall is cutting in. Now this is basically painting in the areas where you can't reach with a roller. For example, where two walls join on the edges of doors. Continue cutting in for the rest of the room. Once you finish cutting in, you can either wash your brush out or you can wrap it in some plastic or some cling film so it's ready to use again a bit later on. Now that we've cut in, we're now going to apply the paint with our roller. Now remember, always start off with a W pattern. You'll see why now, then spread the paint in between. Always work from right to left. And don't forget, this is quite messy. You get a lot of paint spatter. So wear a cap and some goggles. Roll your wall right to left and reverse if you are left-handed. That way you're less likely to accidentally touch and mess up the painted surface with your hand or elbow. Be sure to overlap each stroke so that you get a nice, even pattern. Don't forget to overlap over your cut-in lines. One layer of undercoat may be sufficient depending on what paint you're going to be putting on top. If you had a dark base underneath beforehand, you may need to apply 2 coats of undercoat, especially if you're going for a lighter shade on top. If you do notice any drips, fix them quickly while they're wet, otherwise you're going to have to sand them down later. Once your undercoat is dry and you've got enough coats on there, you can now apply your top coat. Same again, we're going to cut in all around the sides, around the doors, the windows and the fittings, and then we'll go on to our roller. If your final coat is going to be a deep dark colour, it's a good idea to use a tint in your undercoat to get a bit more closer to the final colour. Once you've finished cutting in, we're now going to use the roller again. Now remember, start off with a W pattern, going back over it, blending all the paint in. And remember, this can be quite messy, so put your cap on. When you've finished your first coat, wait for it to dry before you apply the second coat. And then check afterwards if you need a third. A good tip to find out if there's any places that you've missed when rolling on a wall is to use a torch or a bright light. It will highlight the dry and wet spots. Once your paint is dry, it's now time to pull off all your masking tape. But before you just rip it all off, be very careful, put it off gently, and where you see places where the paint has actually been peeled off as well, just take a knife and just score that edge, and then you can carry on pulling it off. Any bits which need to be touched up can be done afterwards. Once you've finished removing the masking from the ceilings and the doors and windows, don't forget your light fittings, and then lastly, do your floor and move the drop cloth away at the end. That way any dirt that falls down is not going to go onto the carpet. And there you have it, a beautiful white wall that will brighten up any room.
Another shameless plug, if you'd like a professional painter to paint your room, call 877-866-8001. Give us a call now and we'll connect you to a top-rated professional painter in your area. Now that your ceiling and walls are finished, the last thing to be painted is the woodwork and the trim.
Traditionally, woodwork in the home is painted in hard-wearing enamel. It can sustain a few knocks without looking too shabby and has a gloss finish. Trim consists of windows, window frames, doors and door frames, and also skirting and picture rails. It's always quite difficult when painting windows, so it's always best to take that little bit of extra effort, especially when you're coming up to the glass, because we have a lot of different surfaces. So you want to try and avoid the paint from actually getting on the glass. So be patient, it's going to take more time than you think. And remember, you probably want to close the windows in the evening for security reasons, so start early in the morning so the paint can dry before the evening arrives. The materials you will need include a drop cloth, bucket, sponge and sugar soap, screwdriver, 25mm or 50mm brush, paint shield, block-it painter's tape, sanding block, fine grit sandpaper, steel wool, mineral turpentine, primer if necessary, Modo enamel paint, polycell brush cleaner, and don't forget your safety gear, safety glasses, rubber gloves and a dust mask for sanding. Before you start, it's best to lay down a drop cloth to protect your floor. Next, prep your windows and frames with sugar soap, rinsing well and allowing to dry. Remove any fittings or burglar bars. Use a scraper or sandpaper to remove any loose paint. If painting over varnish, it's best to sand as much as possible to bring it down to new wood. Fill any holes with a wood filler available from builders and allow to dry and sand smooth. We've sanded down our wooden frame and now we're going to put on some wood primer first of all. Most importantly, always mask up the areas you don't want to get paint on. I'm also actually using an angled tipped brush so that it keeps my brush edge away from the wall, which is quite a handy tip. If you don't want to mask up, you can actually use a painter's shield. This is quite a handy tool. Just place it into position and then away you go. Just move it across. If you do get any paint on your window, let it dry and then you can scrape it off with a window scraper. Continue across the rest of the frame and the windowsill and then allow it to dry thoroughly. Always check the tin for the right instructions for drying and preparation of the surface. When using non-drip gloss enamel paint, make sure you do not mix it. It's designed that you do not shake it up, otherwise this breaks down the compounds of the paint and it loses its non-drip properties. If the paint has separated, just gently stir it. Once it's all mixed in, stop and then you can apply your paint. When painting, make sure you use the right size brush. This is a 38mm brush. It's going to allow us to get right in close to the edges and on these thin surfaces. With enamel paint, it's always a good idea to finish on an upstroke. Just allows the paint to settle back down again and all blend in neatly. When it comes to the windows, always apply the paint nearest to the window and then pull away. The last thing you want to do is slip and put a big splatter on the glass. So always pull away. You don't have to put on a thick coat, you can always put on a second coat afterwards. And remember, check the can to see what the actual drying time is of each particular product that you're using. Be patient and finish off the entire surface. Once it's dry, then you can give it a light sand down and a second coat, and that should be sufficient. If you have casement windows, open them halfway. Protect your glass with tape and mask off the walls around the window. Paint them in the following order. 1. Crossbars and rebates. 2. Top and bottom cross rails. 3. Hanging style and hinge edge. 4. Meeting style. And finally 5. Frame. The brush strokes should follow the construction of the joinery, so vertical brush strokes cut off the horizontal ones. Remove any drips on metal, if you left your fittings on, with steel wool dipped in mineral turpentine. To protect your windows, you can either use block-it masking tape, or you can use petroleum jelly, lip balm to actually run along the edge of the window to stop the paint from sticking to the glass, or you can actually use a painter's shield. But a handy hint is to actually leave a 2mm gap between the glass edge and the surface. That way when you paint, you're actually going to seal those two. It stops any moisture getting in through the cracks. Window frames right next to the glass can suffer from mold. Use a fungicide wash or bleach, 1/3 bleach to water dilution, to get rid of the problem. Leave bleach on for 20 minutes and apply more when it dries. Always wear gloves and safety glasses, then scrub and rinse the surface and prime before painting. To paint a door frame or architrave if you have one, the first thing to do is to wash it down with some sugar soap, but make sure you rinse it off well. The next step is to fill in any bumps and any nicks with some filler and sand it down once it's dry. Most importantly, you want to use a 220 grit sandpaper afterwards to get rid of any sheen. Afterwards, then you're going to mask up all the areas so you're not going to get any paint onto your door handles, and at the same time use a rubber stopper to hold the door open so that you can paint all the other sides and it's not going to rub up against the surface and you're going to rub the paint off. We've primed our door, it's sanded, it's dry, and it's now ready for its first coat. Always decant oil-based paint to avoid drying the paint out or allowing debris to fall back into the tin. If you want to paint large areas with enamel, then start at the top and work towards the bottom, moving left to right if you are right-handed. It will feel easier to work this way and you shouldn't get as much paint on your elbow. Paint the door all in one session, otherwise you will see where you took a break. Load the paintbrush, dipping about 1/3 of the bristles into the paint. Paint 3 vertical strokes next to each other, leaving a gap between them just narrower than the paintbrush width. Without reloading the brush, work the brush horizontally to fill in the gaps and smooth the paint. With the brush almost dry, lightly go over the section with vertical strokes, stopping on the upward stroke. This is called laying off and will create a good, even look to your paint job. Once you've finished that section, you're going to do exactly the same, next side down. Do it straight away while the paint is still wet so you can blend the sections into each other. You can close windows and doors if the paint is touch dry by rubbing talc on the meeting surfaces or putting cling wrap on areas likely to stick. To paint the underside of a door, the best way to do this is to actually use a piece of carpet as your paintbrush. We've loaded up the paint onto the carpet and then we're going to slide it underneath backwards and forward to actually transfer that paint on the underside of the door. When painting a panel door, first paint the inside panels, then the horizontal crossbar at the top, following the center strut down, painting the center and horizontal cross pieces. Finish the door's outer vertical pieces before painting the frame. Painting skirting should be done after doors and windows. Make sure you vacuum the area first, you don't want to be picking up any dust with your brush, and obviously put down the tape to stop the paint from going onto your other surfaces. When painting and skirting above a fitted carpet, make sure you don't pick up too much paint on your paintbrush, and start painting from the top of the skirting and move slowly towards the carpet edge of the skirting, so to avoid any drips on the carpet.
Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or would like to hire a professional painter to paint your room for you, please call 877-866-8001 and we will connect you to a top-rated professional painter in your area. Call now.